Any painter will tell you that observation and a thorough knowledge of the subject makes for a better picture. And often the research is just as much fun as the painting. I'm here at Leigh, where we're going to meet some people, we're going to learn a little about the town's past, and we're going to soak up the atmosphere. And then I'm going to paint the town. Leigh is absolutely bristling with subjects to paint. The town, the steep hill rising from almost the water's edge, and the ever-changing tides. Leigh is not only picturesque, that's self-evident, but it's also steeped in history. Any painting that I produce of this place must reach beyond the obvious and the visible and capture some of the excitement and the colour of the town's vibrant past. Visitors and locals alike find much to inspire them at Leigh's Heritage Centre, right here in the old town's High Street. Images of Leighmen and the town where they lived, worked and brought up their families look back at us from the photographs that line the walls. Photography had become widely available by the latter part of the 19th century, and it's from that time that many of these pictures date. By this time, the deep sea lanes to Leigh had long silted up, and so Leighmen became predominantly fishermen. They led hard lives. The sea is a very hard master. It was the sea that shaped and built the character of the Leighmen. Over the centuries, Leighmen built boats. They traded with the world. They fished. And they were never found wanting when they were called to arms to defend their country. And a long while ago, they smuggled. So I've made a start at trying to understand the character of the people of Leigh, and to understand its past. Now it's time to start some painting. I'm looking forward to this. A good place to gain an overall view of Leigh is from Two Tree Island, so that's where I've come to start painting the town. These are Leigh marshes. Here land meets water, river meets sea, and the ever-changing sky adds mood. I've always thought there's something very special about an estuary. Life is played to the rhythm of the tides, and changes are all dramatic. In no time at all, an expanse of water becomes simply a channel, then a trickle, and then it's a mud bank. Then a change, a ripple of water, and the whole foreshore is transformed once more. And amid so much change there is a strange, timeless, unchanging quality, and I must try somehow to capture that elusive quality in my painting. The shape of everything we see here which is man-made, the boats, the buildings, have been influenced by nature, by the wind and the water. Those who build boats or shoreline structures know that we can never challenge the might of nature head-on, only respect its supremacy and form an alliance. I need to introduce contrast into the painting, detail and softness. A feeling of space, but with the intimacy of Leigh calmly sunning itself like an old cat on the south-facing slopes of the hill. This is a place of contrasts. These marshes in the Thames estuary were for centuries a place of mystery, a land that time forgot, deserted and avoided by travellers. Yet the Thames itself was the busiest shipping lane in the world, the major trade route between London, the heart of the British Empire, and the colonies and possessions at the four corners of the earth. And in the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries, Leigh itself was a major port. It's said that the Pilgrim Fathers ship, the Mayflower, may well have been built here at Leigh for the Greenland whaling fleet. When Christopher Martin of Billericay, who was the expedition's treasurer, came to Leigh in 1619 to charter her, the Mayflower was already an old ship. Lack of funds meant that her refit was minimal, and there were those who doubted that she was sufficiently seaworthy for an Atlantic crossing. But provisions were loaded here from Leigh, passengers taken aboard, leaving, it is believed, by Richard Chester's steps on the Strand. And so it was in 1620 that the little ship began her epic journey, first making her way to Southampton and then on to Plymouth, her last port of call in the old world before setting out for the new. The Strand steps date well before Tudor times. Here lived Richard Chester, master of Trinity House and one of Leigh's illustrious mariners. Another son of Leigh was Richard Salmon, who became master of Trinity House in 1641. As early as the 15th century, Leigh provided pilots to guide ships through the hazardous channels of the Thames estuary. A guild of pilots was formed, taking its name from the parish church and calling itself the Guild of St Clement's. On the Kent side, pilots adopted the name of Holy Trinity at Deptford. The guilds merged and Trinity House was formed. The Leigh pilots guided incoming ships and the Deptford men guided departing ships. Leigh's most famous naval family has to be the Haddocks. In the 17th and 18th centuries they provided 2 admirals and 7 Royal Navy captains. Sir Richard Haddock was Admiral of the Fleet and Controller of the Navy, and his son later held that post. At the time of Napoleon, Leigh and the marshes leading up into the Thames were rife with smugglers. The export of goods to France was denied to English traders by strictly enforced French laws, and astronomically high taxes were levied on imports from France. At the same time, Leigh folk were going through a bad time. Leigh had declined in importance as a port. Fewer ships were being built, and fishing, as an alternative livelihood, was somewhat precarious. Leighmen were skilled sailors and knew the tidal creeks and waterways in this area like the back of their hands. Some of them applied their abilities to smuggling, running contraband across the channel. And they had plenty of sympathy and support from the local community. They were never short of a hiding place for their illicit cargoes or a bolt hole should they need to vanish into the night on the approach of the revenue men. And a diversion could be arranged while cargo was unloaded, often in the very centre of the old town. It would be spirited away to cellars and lofts, and when the coast was clear, a string of heavily laden ponies would make their way from Alley Dock to Dawes Heath, where a rendezvous with London merchants would have been arranged. Romantic tales abound of the daring exploits of the smugglers, and of how they always outwitted the revenue men. But we must have some sympathy for these officers of the Crown, who often bettered the smugglers. They weren't the fools they were often taken to be. The fact is that they were recruited from well away from the area, so that they had no connection with local folk, which could compromise their loyalty. Unfortunately, this also meant that they lacked the intimate local knowledge which the smugglers depended on to give them the upper hand. Smuggling became so much a part of the local economy and culture that it gained a kind of respectability. Otherwise law-abiding members of the community often actively supported these smugglers. It was said that at one time illicit spirit was so readily available in Leigh that housewives cleaned their windows with it. Many a curious tale is told of smuggling in Leigh. There was the strange incident of the mystery boy who saved the smugglers from the revenue men. 10 rowing boats, each heavily laden with a cargo of contraband, lay off Leigh, concealed by the sea mist in the marshes. They were waiting for the all-clear signal from the cross-country smugglers, who they were expecting to meet close to Leigh. They waited and waited, but still there was no signal. Now the tide began to turn, time was running out. The Leigh smugglers debated whether to go in and land the cargo in spite of seeing no signal. They had to do something soon. Suddenly they saw a slight figure break cover on the marsh. Instantly several shots rang out from the shore, and the figure dropped to the ground like a stone. The coastline was swarming with armed revenue men. The smugglers made good their escape into the marshes, and some of them made their way back to the mud bank where the young figure who had warned them of the ambush had fallen. They found a boy of about 14 years of age. He was severely wounded. As soon as they could, they took him to the secret cellar under the Peter Boat Inn, and the doctor was called. But he couldn't be saved. In spite of all efforts, he died about a week later. The Leighmen realized that if they reported the death to the authorities, there would be some very awkward questions to be answered. They decided to bury the young hero in the marshes where all the smugglers would know his whereabouts and respect his final resting place. However, soon after, unusually high seasonal tides revealed the remains. This was not such a bad thing, as the unnamed teenage boy was finally given a conventional Christian burial. No one ever found out who the boy was or where he came from. In January 1892, the smugglers of Leigh suffered a setback. In the dead of night, an accidentally dropped oil lamp set fire to the Peter Boat Inn. The flames swept rapidly through the timber-framed building and spread to the adjoining weatherboard cottages. When the cry of fire went up, the entire community was out of bed in an instant. They formed chains of water buckets from the creek by Alley Dock to the blazing buildings, with remarkable urgency. The Leighmen had reason beyond the obvious to douse the flames, which became apparent the next morning. There, in the smoking remains of the Peter boat, exposed for all to see, was the secret cellar beneath the beer cellar. The principal hiding place in the town for contraband had been revealed. Running contraband to the channel was not the only form of smuggling. In those days, a ship's master would buy his position on an ocean-going ship, and in return was permitted to fill part of the hold with his own cargo. However, duty was payable on the cargo, so many a master would arrange for his cargo to be quietly offloaded before he docked in his home port. By the beginning of the 19th century, a drastic reduction in duty made smuggling less profitable, and the formation of the Coast Guard Service heralded the end of the golden age of smuggling. Learning about the colourful stories of Leigh's past helps me to add atmosphere and personality to the painting. Other important sources of information about bygone times are old paintings, postcards and photographs. I've already seen the collection of images at the Leigh Heritage Centre. Now I'm going to talk to someone who has devoted both her private life and her commercial life to retaining and preserving images and artefacts of Southend and Leigh's past, Lynn Tate. Having met Lynn at the foundry in the High Street at Leigh Old Town, I asked her how her passion for old postcards and memorabilia began.
Well, I love postcards because a picture speaks 1,000 words, and in Edwardian times postcards were so prolific that they covered just about everything you can imagine, from just shop fronts to single children and all the events that happened in everybody's town, and nothing is so closer to people's hearts than where they, their roots and where they were born and bred. And people now, with tracing their family history and things like that, they're realising that there's a lot of information on the postcards. So having got my first album and read all the backs of the 600 postcards, I decided I'd have a little glimpse at the front, and the cards really showed how the town has changed over the last 100 years. And so then I thought, right, I'm going to really look for more ones of Southend and Leigh and all the surrounding area. I've always lived in this area. My family have had a boat for longer than they've had me. I used to come down as a child when my father was getting the barnacles off the bottom and hopscotching across the pontoons, and we were only allowed as children to go as far as the cockle sheds. And so I've got a few photographs and pictures of the area where my father's boat was kept, and this is the area where we were allowed to go. And some of these huts I think have come down now, but I did know that area very well. But I didn't venture far into the old town because I think with the road it was quite busy then, so just kept in that little compact area. We used to roll down the cockle sheds. So line drawing here, and I bought this locally in an auction and discovered that it's got the original boat my grandfather had, the Ubiqui, which had a black hull, and I didn't realise until I got the picture home and realised that it's actually got part of my history on it.
Tell me about how you turned your hobby into a business.
Well, I thought it was a shame that only I was looking at the postcards, so what I decided to do one or two talks to various groups, not about the area, just about my collection of postcards, because I collect everything from royalty, shipping, all different areas and different subjects. And so the talk was about old postcards in general. And then I thought people were so interested, it's a shame that a wider audience weren't seeing the cards. So I decided 19 years ago to do a calendar of the old photographs from my old postcards so a wider audience could see them. And then people were sort of saying, oh, it's still changing, it's still changing. So I thought, right, we must keep the tradition going and do some postcards in sets of what was happening in the 80s. The first set of cards that I did in the 80s was of the cockle industry, because I felt that could be disappearing because of all the stringent things that with environmental health. So these were the very first set, and to date now we've probably done, I think, 33 different series, anything up to sort of 16 in a set, and probably about 3 million postcards. And they record everything from Leigh Regatta, the barge race, Arctic weather, the hurricane, and of course good things that happen in the town as well, like the royal visit and events like that. So people don't realise that history is actually what happened this morning and yesterday. And so what I'm trying to do is record what's happening in the 80s and 90s for the next generation, which is, people now are realising that how pertinent it is with the with the year 2000 and realising, oh, what happened in 1990 is so important. Where of course it's all important. When the foundry was available, and I sort of peeped through the door and had a look at this sort of shafts of light coming through the broken glass, and the floor was, well, there wasn't a floor, it was just sort of moss and puddles, and there were great gaping bits in the roof, and I thought, yes, that's for me. I've got a fairly good imagination, and I felt it was absolutely right for my business, and as it was a large space and I'm rather well known, sort of give me a space and I'll fill it, I felt yes, that would be right. It also coincided with the time when I was realising that I wasn't content with just having what was buying the postcards. I actually wanted to buy what was depicted on them, so I started to collect all the old toys and children's clothes, wedding dresses, carts, bicycles, push chairs, kitchen ranges, old bikes, and then of course old carts. Although I don't drive, I liked all the old delivery carts which were on the postcards, so started to acquire these from all over. And when they were building the foundry, I was having a holiday in Wales where my in-laws live, and my husband casually said to me, oh, I've seen a pier train just down by the railway line, and as he's never seen one before apart from seeing it in a picture which he'd purchased for me, I said, no, they paint all the caravans up here green, so I thought he'd just mistaken it. So when I did see it, I sort of nearly got run over when I sort of, thought, that is a pier train. So I rushed down to the railway line and saw it. This was about 7:30. By 9:45, we tracked down the owner, and I was the proud owner of a 1949 green AC pier train, which incidentally is exactly the same age as me. It was delivered 3 days before me. So we're nearly twins. So very proud owner of this pier train, which was transported on a low loader in the middle of the night, and sort of, well, squeezed through the entrance of the foundry because they hadn't completed it yet, so they were able to sort of do the building to accommodate a great gap in the side so that it could be shoehorned in. And then that was in for about 6 weeks before we opened, so it could be fully renovated and back to its glory with a crest on the front. Our carts go out to carnivals and things like that, and we use a lot of the photographs for exhibition purposes and lend them out to people so that as many people can benefit from what's happening in Old Leigh and how it is. And we just mustn't forget not only how Leigh was, but the future of Leigh, and I think we've been able to keep it intact for the next generation. I think with Old Leigh, it is special to so many people, and it's certainly special to me.
Having learnt more and more about the old town, I now have to resist the temptation to add too much detail to my painting. It's difficult to know when a picture's finished. I want it to be complete, but I want it to keep its spontaneity. I don't want it to look tired or over-painted. But I think it's now time to fit it into a mount and frame it. Hopefully it can now adorn a wall and bring some of the spirit of Leigh and the marshes out here at Two Tree Island into someone's home.